A question that I have answered probably more times than I can count is, what do I do about heartburn and reflux? Today I'd like to share with you a couple of hints that you can try at home, and these are practical things that actually help to address the cause of reflux instead of just managing the symptoms. People oftentimes take medications to mask the symptoms of reflux, and these medications include antacids, things like enos and other antacids that are on the market. And basically what they do is, when you drink them, they neutralize the stomach acidity or the stomach acid. It causes the stomach acid to become more alkali, and then you don't have that burning sensation. Reflux and heartburn comes from stomach content that moves up into the esophagus. And as it pushes up into the esophagus lining, or the membrane on the inside of the esophagus, has sensitivity to that acid, and it burns and it's uncomfortable because the esophagus does not have the mucus lining that protects it in the same way that the stomach does. Inside the stomach you have a mucus secretion that lines the inner part of the stomach to shield it so that the acid and the digestive enzymes digest your food and that it does not digest your stomach. But your esophagus doesn't have that mucus production or that mucus secretion, and for that reason, when things push up, when the content of your stomach pushes up into the esophagus, you get that incredible burning sensation, and it can be super uncomfortable. Acid can actually push up all the way in the esophagus until it gets to the voice box. So many people have symptoms of, for instance, clearing their throat all the time. And when you hear somebody going like that, especially early in the mornings, and they're doing that over and over, it could be a telltale sign that they have reflux, even if they don't have the burning sensation or the pain or the discomfort. Apart from that, that acid can actually irritate the back of the throat. It can even affect the sinuses, and it can be responsible for chronic problems with ear issues and for sinus symptoms. And many people have various medications that they take thinking that their sinus and ear problems come from allergies. Then they take antihistamines and various other medications, but meanwhile, acid reflux could be at the core of that problem as well. So let's get back to the reflux and see how we can address that. If I have acid pushing up into the stomach, one of the main things that people fall into the trap of doing is trying to just neutralize that acid. But what they don't realize is that the content that continues to push up, even though it may not cause the burning sensation, still does damage in the esophagus. It can still damage the back of the throat, the voice box, and it can still damage the sinuses and canals going through to the ears. So neutralizing that acid doesn't really solve most of the problem. The other thing is that neutralizing the acid has various other negative complications. If I neutralize the acid in my stomach, it reduces how well my stomach is able to digest my food. It delays how quickly my food is digested, and that results in an increased likelihood that the content of my stomach can actually ferment and become rotten before it ultimately moves down into my intestines. That will result in increased absorption of toxic material into my bloodstream, and it just causes many other complications. And another issue with neutralizing my stomach acid and digestive enzymes is that there are certain nutrients that cannot absorb in an alkaline environment. They require that acidity. For instance, vitamin B12. If I constantly reduce the acidity in my stomach, B12 deficiencies are a common complication, and there are various other nutrients that require that acidity in order to absorb. Proteins also don't break apart sufficiently, so if I don't get sufficient digestion of proteins, it means I also get absorption of incompletely digested proteins, and that has a host of other negative impacts, including things like autoimmune problems. So I do not want to unnecessarily dilute acidity in my stomach. I want my acid to be strong enough so that it can digest my food properly, but I don't want it to digest my stomach lining, and I definitely don't want it coming up into my esophagus. So what can I do? Key aspects to this are things that interfere with digestion and that causes unnecessary gases to form, unnecessary fermentation, and things that will kind of cause bubbling up into the esophagus. So I want to avoid excessive sugars. I do not want to use processed sugars. I want to stay away from all foods containing processed sugars, and I want to use natural sweeteners that don't aggravate fermentation. That includes things like dates, raisins, honey, in moderate quantities and without going into the excess. Those are far better alternatives. Their high fiber content and their high mineral content also prevents other complications that we get with standard processed sugars. So I want to avoid processed sugars. I definitely want to avoid caffeine. Caffeine is very irritating to the inner lining of the stomach. It damages the mucous membrane in the stomach, so it can actually cause my stomach acidity to digest my stomach itself, which is really, really bad. But caffeine also aggravates reflux and heartburn sensations, various mechanisms. Other things that I really want to avoid are things like alcohol. Alcohol, even in small quantities, really does tremendous damage to the inner lining of the stomach, but it also suppresses normal neurological function, and therefore it will prevent the normal function of certain sphincters that need to close off. So avoiding alcohol is a great way for me to improve how my stomach is meant to work, enhance its natural function, which includes keeping the stomach content in the stomach and not pushing it up into the esophagus. What I also want to avoid at all costs, I want to stay away from chemical additives, preservatives, colorants, all of those different things that increase the chemical component of food. It messes up my normal digestive processes, it damages neurology, it has various other negative impacts, which I'm not going to delve into now, but those additives and food, little bits of toxicity that are added to food and then labeled as safe to eat, those things cause a tremendous amount of damage and aggravate problems like heartburn and reflux. I also want to avoid all the time, regardless of whether or not I have reflux, as a general rule for health, I want to avoid snacking between meals. Every single time I'm eating in between meals, I'm interrupting my digestive processes, triggering my stomach to delay emptying. It delays the digestion of food, it increases fermentation, it causes the food content in my stomach to rot, and there are various ways in which it causes drama. So avoiding snacking is important, but avoiding snacking is crucial for avoiding heartburn. Another mechanism whereby snacking causes major problems is by affecting the volume of food that is in the stomach. If I've eaten a meal, my stomach is already full normally, and if I keep adding little bits through snacking, I'm just stretching that stomach beyond its capacity, and it's going to have a sphincter at the bottom of the stomach that remains closed because there are receptors that detect that there's undigested food. And as that sphincter remains closed and the volume keeps stretching, the only way and the only place that that volume can actually stretch to is upwards. So it will push the content inside the stomach, which is mixed with all that acidity, up into the esophagus, which is really unhealthy, very uncomfortable, and does tremendous damage. Avoiding snacking is a brilliant way to fight against indigestion and heartburn symptoms and to prevent the damage that it causes. So I don't want to encourage anyone ever at any point to get involved in a routine that involves snacking. Stick to your main meals and focus on those main meals, making them sufficient, making them wholesome, making sure that they contain sufficient quantities of macronutrients so that you are full enough and that you don't have that need for snacking between. Speaking about meal routine, another major way of preventing reflux symptoms is to avoid eating at nighttime. We recommend, in the majority of cases, 2 main meals for the day, which should be breakfast and lunch, and the last main meal for the day should be no later than 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. After 4:30, you really shouldn't be eating any big meals. And if you are going to eat 2 meals a day, you can follow a meal routine, for instance, eating breakfast early in the morning and then having your second meal for the day between 3 and 4, and that should be okay. But if you are going to have food in the evenings, your first main meals, your 2 main meals for the day, should be early enough so that there's sufficient time for your lunch to digest, for your stomach to empty, and for your stomach to be rested and ready to digest that last small meal for the day. If you are going to have 3 meals for the day, a very early breakfast, an early lunch, and a very light supper is okay. Supper should be no later than 7 o'clock in the evening. That is actually quite late. If you can push it up to 6 o'clock, that's best. But remember to keep your minimum of 5 to 6 hours spacing between every meal. So you'll have to adjust your entire schedule to squeeze that in. If you are already struggling with reflux and indigestion, it is far more advisable to stick to 2 main meals for the day and skip supper altogether. Having an empty stomach by the time that you go to bed and at the time that you are lying flat is an ideal way to make sure that there is nothing that pushes up into the esophagus. And if your stomach is empty, if it's finished digesting your last meal for the day, then even if there is a little bit of liquid coming up into the esophagus, it won't be very acidic and it won't contain all those strong acids that are present when there's also food in the stomach. An empty stomach at bedtime is probably one of the most powerful ways to prevent reflux while you're sleeping. And silent reflux is common. Sometimes people have many problems with their sinuses, with their voice box, with coughing, coughs that don't clear up. And oftentimes, those symptoms relate to reflux that happens at night when people are not aware of the burning and the discomfort that the reflux would cause. So we would term that to be silent reflux. They won't know about it, but they'll have various other complications that they struggle to resolve and for which people end up resorting to lots of medications. Last point to remember, speaking about medications, is that a lot of medications actually aggravate reflux, including some of the treatments that are prescribed for heartburn. So staying away from medications, having healthy lifestyle principles, maintaining a healthy meal routine, getting the maximum absorption of nutrients fresh into your bloodstream, building good blood by making healthy choices. Those are all ways in which you can reduce your need for medications and further reduce the risk factors that aggravate problems like reflux. If you have found these hints to be helpful, make sure that you comment, share your experiences, like and subscribe to the channel so that you can be notified when we release videos in the future.